So, how did you get the idea of this project?
In a way, it feels like it's always been there. I started watching teen movies when I was 13, 14, and so I've inadvertently been researching a film about teen movies all my life. But I think it was a few years ago when I started to really start rewatching all these films that I loved as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old. And I became so fascinated by how they could still pack a really kind of strong emotional punch that seemed to connect me to my teenage self. But at the same time, there were so many layers to them that I never noticed as a teenager, and I was fascinated by that kind of bittersweet feeling of like nostalgia but also unease.
Was it difficult to choose which movies will appear in your own movie?
Yeah. I mean, it involved a lot of sitting in my bedroom watching teen movies for hours and hours on end. I had a good sort of 3-month period where I was completely cut off from the world, just sitting there watching 15-year-old teen movies. But I think that was really valuable in a way because it meant that I kind of ceased to be watching any one individual film, and instead I felt like I was watching the whole genre. It came kind of washing over me. And then, from there, what really emerged was a very clear kind of structure that I wanted the film to follow, because I think that's what these movies all share, is a very kind of clear narrative arc. There was no doubt in my mind that a film that was trying to evoke teen movies would need to start with the first day back at school, would need to end with the graduation, and then from there it's just about filling in all the middle. I think so. I then looked for individual films that could really kind of exemplify, how teen movies think and feel about certain different parts of the teenage experience. And a lot of those inevitably were the ones that really connected with me as a teenager, because that's my bias.
Yes.
It was an incredible sort of surreal experience, feeling so kind of at one with this very strange genre.
Yes. And you cut the movie with different chapters. When did you choose to do that? It was always here, or?
Yeah, well, I always knew I wanted it to kind of fit a very kind of strict teen movie formula, because I think there's a real, although that sounds like a kind of negative word to say that they're formulaic, I think actually there's a real value in the fact that they're formulaic, because it's very, certainly when you're a teenager, it's very reassuring, it's very sort of comfortable if you know where you're going in a movie. And also I think that comfort and that familiarity allows them to then do some very weird, tricky things that such mainstream movies might not otherwise get away with. And so, splitting the film up into these kind of sections was very influenced by how teen movies do tend to follow a formula. And so, to tell you that my film is formulaic is probably not a very good kind of marketing angle, but I think it was actually very much, part of the appeal for me.
Yeah. When did you take the decision that Feruza will be the narrator of the movie? Have you thought you could do it?
I did think about that. Yeah, I mean, certainly as I was developing the film and starting to cut it together, I did the kind of temporary narration. But the problem was the fact that my accent is so clearly British.
Yes.
It felt, it showed me up for what I was, which was an outsider. I was an outsider looking in at this world. And actually, I really didn't want the film to feel like that. I wanted the film to feel like a completely closed-off world that you were stepping inside and then never being pulled out of. And so I wanted a voice that could kind of feel at home within that world, but also kind of deconstruct that world from within. And it kind of, perhaps foolishly, I got it in my head very early on that Fairuza Balk would be perfect for that, because her voice is so sort of evocative, but also kind of sardonic. And we didn't ask her until right at the end of the process, by which point I had made the mistake of completely fixating on the idea that it should be her and hearing every line in her voice. And it was just really, fortunate that by the time we got around to introducing her to the idea, she was totally on board and really got what we were trying to do. And 2 weeks later I was sat there with Nancy from The Craft recording the narration, which was very surreal.
How long the editing of all the sequences you?
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
Making a movie like this, like an
Yes.
essay film,
To
is
take all the sequences and.
it's basically just editing for a long, long
Yeah.
time. I mean, I did have a few months of research and then I wrote a script for the film, but that really was only a tiny section of the process, because the second you start to lay out all these clips in the edit, you really get a feel for what works and what doesn't. And so it becomes this very kind of free form and very creatively exciting process, but also completely open-ended. You know,
Yes.
there's no shoot, so you could go on forever. Had we not had our premiere set in stone, I probably would still be editing the film now, because you could keep making it a bit better. You could keep putting in more scenes, keep watching more teen movies. You need someone to kind of stop you at a certain point and say, no, that's fine now.
About the music, can you talk about how did you choose Summer Camp? How did you not know them, and how you work on the original soundtrack with them?
Sure, yeah. I've been a massive fan of summer camps for years, and kind of had vague connections to them through friends, but still very much thought of myself as like a fan to their artist. But I had a suspicion that they might be interested in the idea, because lots of their music, they've had 2 albums now, with the 3rd one coming out soon, and all their albums not only seem to kind of create a very self-contained universe, which is exactly what I was trying to do with the film, but also have recurring themes of kind of adolescence and Americana and yearning and all the kind of feeling that I was trying to get out from this movie. So it felt like a perfect fit to me. And I was incredibly lucky, not only that they were willing to do it, but that they were willing to be working on it throughout the whole process. So rather than me make the film and then hand it over to them and they put some music on it, they were involved from the very beginning, kind of coming up with ideas that I would then respond to visually, and then with other sequences I would give them a rough cut and they would respond to it with music, and it became a really nice kind of batting back and forth experience.
You used the Kickstarter. Why this choice?
I think, for one thing, I was really fortunate that Kickstarter had just launched in the UK when we were making the film. And so I probably got in there just before it became really annoying when people ask you to donate to their Kickstarter, and maybe like I was the beneficiary of that. But also I think, Kickstarter and other crowdfunding platforms are certainly not right for every project. But I think one like this, where me and the other filmmakers didn't have a lot of prior experience, but we had an idea that we knew would connect with a lot of people, because people do have such intimate relationships with teen movies.
Yeah.
Sorry, and so it meant that even if they didn't necessarily know us as filmmakers, they could look at this idea and they could imagine that it would be the kind of film they'd want to see or even make themselves. And so we built up immediately this kind of community of people that we knew were into the idea. And the money aside, it was just so useful to know that there was an audience for the film before we even started making it, to kind of think, we're not alone in feeling this passionate about these movies.
What was the reaction when you show your movie the first time to the audience?
Terrifying from my perspective. It's a very strange thing to see a film that you've only ever worked on in your bedroom on a tiny little computer monitor suddenly on a huge 40-foot cinema screen, not least with 400 people sitting there watching it. So it was very nerve-wracking, and especially because I think it felt like a good mirror of the teen movie watching experience, which is, I think a lot of people are familiar with these movies on a very intimate level from watching them at home on VHS, late at night. It's a very kind of personal experience. But then also they exist to be shown in massive cinemas with huge audiences. So it felt like that. It felt like someone was taking my very intimate thing that I shared with this computer in my room and showing it to hundreds of people. But it was incredible. I couldn't believe how positive people were about it and how much people connected with all these films that I think I slightly thought were, I was the only one who remembered them, and of course, I'm wrong. Millions of people do.
How it was to show it at South by Southwest?
Yeah, it was bizarre. I had basically imagined that we would maybe take the film, rent out a tiny cinema in London, and show it to a few friends. So I think when someone first mentioned the idea of submitting it to South by Southwest, that was very much like a crazy dream that would never happen. And then, so to find ourselves there in Texas, surrounded by films and filmmakers that we idolized, was just bizarre. Had to keep teaching myself, not to compare my film to all the other ones playing, because I just didn't feel worthy at all.
So if you have to choose one movie among all you choose for your own movie, which one do you take?
The one that always has stuck with me, and is probably like the reason that Beyond Clueless exists in the first place, is not a very critically respected film, but the 2004 road comedy Euro Trip is a film that, for one reason or another, really struck me when I was like 13, 14, whenever I first saw it. And over the years I've just revisited it every couple of years, and it always seems to offer something more. Like when I was a teenager, I really liked just like the gross out comedy and the nudity and all the things that teenagers like. And then as I got older, I was so amazed by how like genuinely smart that film is, and how like satirically sharp it is, which might not come through if you only see the little clips that are in Beyond Clueless. But I would highly recommend that you go and watch Eurotrip if you haven't seen it.
If you have the opportunity to make your own teen movie with actor, which cast do you choose? The perfect cast for you?
Oh wow. Yes, but it wouldn't work, because I'd want to cast all the people that are in Beyond Clueless who are now 40. But then again, they were like 28 when they shot all those movies back then, so maybe they can still play teenagers at 45. I think like the standout cast members in the teen movie that I already have made, Beyond Clueless, if you count that as a teen movie, I would say someone like Devon Sawyer, I think is a brilliant actor, and kind of fell off the map for a bit and is now kind of re-emerging. But I think it's unfair that he might have ever been written off as, just like a pretty boy, or, kind of throwing away like a teenage role in a very easy way. I think several of his performances, especially in the film Idle Hands, where he plays the boy whose arm becomes possessed, I think that's an incredible performance. I mean, it's like two performances. His hand gives a whole separate performance to him. And he invests a lot of himself in that. He's the star of Beyond Clueless, if there is one.
Do you think you could be a director, maybe?
I would of like a teen movie.
No, in general, maybe.
Of like fiction films.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I would love to. I mean, I think it's no accident that I found myself drawn to make this film that feels very fiction and feels very narrative. Obviously, it is built entirely from fictional material, and that that's a mode of storytelling that I completely love, and and then I love documentary as well. So it was brilliant for me to be able to make a film that could kind of straddle those two things and could feel obviously like fiction because of it's full of fictional performances, but also like non-fiction in that it's examining that in a larger context. So for now, I'm very happy kind of walking the tightrope, but I'd happily fall off in either direction.
So you did this project with teen movies. Sorry. So do you think you could do this with another genre?
Yeah, in fact, I've kind of just started. About a week ago, I started working on my next film, which is a film for the BBC called Fear Itself.
Okay. And
it's not so much of a total genre study as this, but it's exploring fear through horror movies.
Okay.
So I've put myself back in the small room watching hours and hours of terrifying movies from the last 100 years So being out here in the sun
Yes.
is a strange and pleasant experience.
So, as a former blogger, what advice can you give to the current generation of movie bloggers?
Just kind of like, I mean, when I started my blog,
Yeah.
I was like 16, and it was several years before anyone really started reading it. And I think that was, although it was frustrating at the time, you know, obviously I wanted more people to be reading it,
Yeah.
it was really valuable in a way, because it meant that I had kind of the time and the privacy to improve my writing style and kind of work out what my voice actually was. And, you know, when I started out, certainly I did what I think a lot of people do, which is just mimic writers that I liked. And then over time, because I was doing it so much, I learned to just kind of write in my own natural voice. And that's, I don't think, by coincidence, when people started to actually take an interest in it. So yeah, I think it's easier said than done, but if you can find what's different about your voice than anyone else's, I think people really respond to that.
And for you, what are the keys to success for you?
Keys to success. I think any success I've had has tended to come out of like not thinking ahead too far.
Yeah.
Thinking like one step ahead. Because I remember as a teenager, I used to, you know, I always knew I like wanted to work as a filmmaker in some way or work in film. But I would always think about it in like 10 steps ahead and thinking like, oh God, how do I get to that end point that seems so impossibly far away? And actually, I think what was really helpful for me was the realization that you could just do one thing at a time, and either you'll get to that imagined end point or you won't, but you'll get somewhere interesting. And, you know, it's kind of the process of making Beyond Clueless as well. Was I didn't know how to make a film, and I think if I'd thought at the beginning about all the stuff that would be involved, it would have just terrified me and I would have probably not done it. But if I just thought at like one thing at a time, you know, how do I write up a contract? And then how do I, you know, edit this particular bit of the film? Each little thing became so much easier when I didn't think of it in the larger context. And I think, there's very little you can't do if you take it in tiny, tiny steps.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Cheers.